Clock. And recapping our top story at noon, serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer was murdered this morning at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage. Convicted wife killer Jeffrey Anderson also seriously injured. Prison officials say the two were attacked apparently by the same inmate in separate areas at a recreation area of the prison. We will continue gathering details and getting reaction on this major story throughout the day, and of course have much more for you live at 5.
Can you give us sort of a chronology? Mr. Dahmer and Mr. Anderson go into the gym to do their work at a certain time, and then who finds them then? Can you just run through the events?
The preliminary information that I have, they were taken to their work site at 7:50 this morning, and the next timepiece I have is that at 8:10 this morning. First, one individual was discovered in one of the bathrooms, and then the second individual was discovered in the other bathroom.
You had mentioned earlier that he had been cleared along with Jesse Anderson and one other individual to do the work in the gym. Is that other individual, is he the suspect?
Yes, he is.
Can you tell us any information about him? About what he is incarcerated for, his background?
At this time, I don't have that information before me. We can have it later today if in fact he is confirmed as the alleged suspect.
Is he a convicted killer?
I don't recall that information right off the top of my head.
Mike, was there anything that foretold that this, something might happen? Any kind of indication?
No, if there were indications, we would have taken precautions to see that it wouldn't have happened. There was nothing that indicated that this attack was pending.
Mike, I may have missed it, but you said somebody was investigating. Is it Department of Corrections or DOJ or both? Or?
The Columbia County Sheriff's Department is investigating this incident. They are on the scene right now, and the gymnasium is cordoned off.
And they're in charge of the investigation?
Yes, we turn that over immediately.
I have the scene right. There was in the gym. There were 5 people. 2 of your officers, Dahmer, Anderson, and the suspect. Were there others in the gym area?
The information I have is there was also a rec director present in the gym who was in his office.
But nobody witnessed this?
I don't know that information at this time.
Joe indicated that in the bathrooms there was a lot of blood in the area. And there was some blood on some things that could have been used as a weapon. Could you identify what those things were? Was this gymnastic equipment or?
The only information I have is that a broom handle was found that was bloody.
In the staff bathroom or in the inmate bathroom?
That I don't know, Art.
Was that the weapon, do you think?
That I don't know either.
Your description of what happened, both men were unconscious when they were...
It's my understanding Mr. Dahmer was unconscious and Mr. Anderson was conscious.
Does Mr. Anderson help you? Or
Mr. Anderson, what?
is he able to help at this point? Or talk to sheriff's deputies or whatever?
I have no information in that regard.
How do you...
After this, where's Jeffrey Dahmer's remains at right now? What's going to be happening with that?
I assume that Mr. Dahmer's remains are still at the hospital, and in discussions with the family, it'll be determined where we go from here.
There will be an autopsy done.
That's the general practice with the inmates in our custody who die.
And who will perform that?
Probably a pathologist from UW Hospital.
Is this...
Someone like Dr. Huntington, yes.
Is this a black eye for the department? I understand it just happened a couple of hours ago. How do you feel about it personally?
I feel it's a terrible tragedy. It's something we certainly try to prevent. This is not certainly something of regular occurrence. This is something that is first in my time with an inmate upon inmate assault that has resulted in this kind of terrible ending. We certainly will be debriefing this and see what, if anything, could be done to prevent this kind of incident in the future. We certainly do not want it repeated.
Yeah, what kind of things can you do?
Well, that's yet to be determined. We have to look at the facts that were present when this incident occurred to see if we can make sure things of that nature did not happen again. It's preliminary for me to say anything that should be done differently.
Mike, you have a few years, and you say when in your tenure with the Department of Corrections, or since you became secretary, nothing like this has happened.
My recollection of my tenure with the department in terms of an inmate upon inmate assault that resulted in the death of an inmate, I believe this is the first time in my
And you've been
tenure.
here
25 plus years.
Mike, could you tell us if you contacted Jeffrey's father or his mother in California, or do you let the news media take care of that when there's a tragedy such as this?
We do not leave notification of next of kin up to the news media. We assume that responsibility ourselves, and the institution notified family members first upon being made aware that there was a serious attack on both Mr. Dahmer and Mr. Anderson. Mr. Dahmer's family was recontacted when we were notified by the hospital that Mr. Dahmer had been pronounced dead.
Was he dead at the scene, or I know he was pronounced dead in 9/11. Was he alive before that?
That I do not know.
Can you explain a little bit what the procedure now is in terms of investigating basically what happened? You might have gone over this, but I wasn't here, so.
The Columbia County Sheriff's Department is on the scene now conducting their investigation. Secondly, our staff at the institution is in the process of writing incident reports. And third, I will convene a panel that will investigate the facts around this whole incident.
Assuming Mr. Anderson also survives or was not, would there be charges against him? Or do we know it just depends on what happens in the investigation?
The results of the Columbia County Sheriff's investigation will determine who is charged and who isn't.
You're convening a special panel within the Department of Corrections.
According to administrative code, a special panel is to be convened in this kind of circumstance.
So this is not unusual?
The procedure is not unusual. It's laid out in the administrative code. The incident in and of itself is unusual, which is why you would convene such a panel.
And what will the panel do?
The panel will conduct its own investigation, including looking at policies and procedures of the department, the Division of Adult Institutions, and the Columbia Correctional Institution.
You had said a broom handle of some sort was used in this beating.
I'm not saying it was used, I'm saying it was found on the scene, and information I have is that it was bloodied.
Okay, assuming that may have had a role in this, how would inmates have access to something like that?
Well, again, all three of these inmates, they were up there to provide janitorial duties. They were the janitors for the gymnasium, so I can only assume that they had access to mops and broom handles.
Like you said with the earlier incident, it was your assessment and Mr. Dahmer's assessment that that was an isolated incident?
That is correct, yes.
If Mr. Dahmer had felt otherwise, would that have been enough to keep him in a different setting, or?
I'm certain it would have been a factor in our staff's deliberation as to where Mr. Dahmer would have been assigned outside of his immediate living unit.
I'm just trying to decide how to describe where he was. Was he in the general population or not?
He was in the general population of the Columbia Correctional Institution, but you have to recognize Columbia is divided into different housing units, and we do not have much mingling of inmates between housing units. So he was interactive with the inmates in his housing unit.
Was Jesse Anderson and or the suspect in the same housing unit?
Mr. Anderson was not in that housing unit. He was in a different housing unit, and I believe the suspect was in the housing unit, the same as Mr. Dahmer.
How long had Mr. Dahmer been doing this job? And again, could you tell us why he was, in part with the general population, why he wasn't given his notoriety, isolated from the general population?
First of all, Mr. Dahmer had been on this job assignment for 3 weeks. Secondly, even though Mr. Dahmer is notorious outside of the prison system, within the confines of Columbia Correctional Institution, there are numbers of inmates there who have committed first-degree murder, some of them multiple murders. In that context, he is not considered to be so notorious. And again, it's been an extensive period of time since the assault on Mr. Dahmer, which was not very serious in nature, and again, it was our staff's conclusion and Mr. Dahmer's conclusion that that was an isolated incident. Therefore, there was less concern for his safety. At all times, we are concerned about each and every inmate's safety as well as staff safety.
Is there a lockdown at the prison today?
No, there is not a lockdown at the prison today.
He was not fearful of his well-being.
With the information that staff had that has been provided to me, Mr. Dahmer was not fearful of his well-being.
Once again, you didn't feel that earlier incident in the sense of connected with anyone?
No, and preliminary information would lead us to believe it's not connected either.
And no information as to what precipitated today?
No information as to precipitation or motivation.
Both of the inmates, victims, and with Jesse Anderson saying that 2 blacks had been responsible for his wife's stabbing, couldn't consider what might have.
I would say it's very premature to draw any conclusions as to what motivated these attacks, whether it was a disagreement between an attacker and these 2 individuals, or whether it was some other factor. We just don't know at this point. At this point, there is 1 inmate who is in secure lockup who is...
Can you be a little bit more specific? Is he suffering the same general kinds of wounds that Mr. Dahmer suffered?
The information I have is that he has severe injuries to the head, which are similar to what Mr. Dahmer had.
And can you say whether it was a blunt or a sharp instrument?
I can't say.
But there was something other than hand, some kind of weapon was involved?
Can't say for, I mean, one could surmise a number of things.
Institutions at Waupun and Green Bay, which are not in management. Those are older institutions which are...
We'll go through what happened this morning, just from the time-wise. You were notified?
Back while he was performing janitorial duties in the gymnasium at the Columbia Correctional Institution, where he was discovered at 8:10 a.m. this morning.
8:10 a.m.?
Yes.
And at the time of his bodies being discovered?
I don't know if I have accurate information on that. I'll have to wait until this afternoon when I'm assured that I have accurate information on that.
And what is Anderson's condition?